this is a city that's a great city. I was reminded by my good friend Bill Rudin that there's still a lot of good people in the city. Recently, my life was saved by a good Samaritan, and this city is full of those. So I believe in this city. I've lived here my entire life, and I think part of this panel is talking about the golden apple, and we always talk about if the golden apple is still shining. I believe it's still shining. Going through this morning, you're almost ready to kill yourself. But those are the bankers. I'm a banker. Don't listen to the bankers. And I think what we're hearing this afternoon, despite all the financing challenges, things can still get done, and I believe that. Things turn around, things change. I mean, I remember my first mortgage was 18%. 18%. We had just gotten married. My beautiful wife, Susan, was there. And our first mortgage was 18%. I refinanced it for 15%, then refinanced it for 14%. I thought I was rich. But you're able to buy a CD in the bank and get 21% plus a toaster. If you remember that? You get a toaster. So things may seem challenging now. It's nowhere near where it was. We have a lot of opportunity in front of us. So we have an esteemed group of people here. Let me just state that Bill Rudin has been at every one of these events, which is amazing. Bill, thank you.
I started in high school.
Started in high school. Just think about that. The other attendees have been this for over a decade, which is amazing. I wish we had codified each of these conversations, but we haven't. But let me jump in here with Scott. You know all the backgrounds. You could read the brochure. I think their reputations speak for themselves. I'm going to jump into this with Scott, because we're talking about challenges. The mayor laid out some solutions potentially, but Scott, you are probably one of the most involved private individuals I know of in the city, if not the state, which I admire you for tremendously, as you know. In your opinion, what are New York's probably 3 greatest challenges, and how could they be addressed?
Small question.
It's a small question. Let's start with the big one.
Thanks, Rob. And first, to your point, it was inspiring to hear the mayor, inspiring to hear Larry and the career he had. It also gave me hope, because now it looks like I'm only halfway through my career based on seeing how Larry's still going so strong at 91. So but it does give you hope, and it does inspire, and it shows you that this city is resilient, right? And that we've been through a lot. Larry, gave some descriptions, but we've all been through a lot and have seen the cycles come and go. And every time you run into a challenge in New York, people are quick to say this is it, and the obituary is written, and over again, we prove that was premature, and we find a way to reinvent ourselves and come back better and stronger, whether that was post 9/11, Superstorm Sandy, the financial crisis, and then the COVID crisis. But I think one of the big challenges we have is that doesn't just happen, right? What we can't have is just be complacent and just say, we'll overcome this. We're going to come back better and stronger, right? Because it takes work, it takes effort, it takes vision, it takes commitment from people like the people in this room, and a sense of civic responsibility. And what really has made New York successful over this last number of decades is being this great magnet for talent. And that as we've attracted knowledge workers from around the world, the brightest people want to live here, they want to work here, they want to come visit here. And there's no other place in the world that has this pool of diverse people and talent and culture and lifestyle like New York City has. And that then brings companies, and we had this positive self-reinforcing cycle. But when that talent comes here, they make a bargain with the city, because it's not easy to live in the city. There's affordability issues, there's congestion issues, there's smaller spaces that you're living in, but you're willing to trade that off for the other side of that bargain, which is public safety, quality of life, infrastructure, culture, entertainment, career opportunities, working with the best and brightest yourself. And I think the risk we run right now is that we've come to a point where we're losing some of that balance. And starting with what the mayor said on public safety, which I would say is probably the most prominent area to focus on, is that once we don't have public safety, it throws everything off, right? Because if you own a business, you're going to be afraid to locate here for your employees. If you're a family person, you're going to be afraid to have your family live here because of public safety. So that has to be dealt with. And that's a challenge that needs to be overcome. And it's something that's not easy to deal with, because you saw the leadership we have in the mayor talking about how to get that done, and someone that's actually worked in the NYPD, but it's more systemic than it is just a cultural or communication issue. It's that we've lost NYPD officers, we're trying to replace them. There is an issue of community policing that hasn't come back the way it was. The pendulum swung pretty far from an ideological perspective to be sort of anti-police. We may need to swing back to find a spot to where equilibrium is, but we have to overcome that. So that's the first challenge. I said the second that concerns me is government in general, right? Which is leadership. You know, all the things that we have, and you listen again to the mayor speak. You know, we need good leadership, not just good leadership in terms of inspirational words and communication, which is critical and important for us, but also to be able to take on the tough challenges and execute. Larry talked about, Mayor Adams standing up on the project that you were working on in Queens, and it's great to see some of those elements there where you're actually doing that. But this is something that in our city itself right now, we've been at a point where we just have not had good government that we can rely on. And an example I like to point to is when Mayor Bloomberg ended his term, the budget for the city was $64 billion. Today it's $104 billion per year. So imagine if someone was told, Mayor Bloomberg, if you had another term, that you're gonna have $40 billion more per year. What would you do in terms of the homelessness crisis? What would you do in terms of the crime crisis? What would you do in terms of the housing crisis that we have in this city? And so I think there's a need to hold elected officials accountable, that we're willing to pay these taxes that Larry was speaking of, but we need to make sure we see a return on that investment in quality of life, in services, and can't go to places that's a black hole. And I think that's too often what's happening as we go forward. And then the third thing I'll just say, and I'll end it quickly, which is we all need to be committed from a civics perspective. Again, that's been a comment that's been resonated, and we as an industry are pretty good. But you go to these meetings, these town hall meetings, these community meetings, there's none of us there, right? There's a small group of very vocal people that are very passionate about one particular issue. And if you don't have a counterbalance to that voice, if you don't have a counter narrative about, while that's important and that's an interesting point, but it's a political ideology and we also need some practical policies to counterbalance that, then they're going to overwhelm the system. And that's what's happened politically over the last decade or so in New York. It's been a one extreme voice that's been drowning out everyone else. And so a challenge and a solution is we all need to find ways to be involved and make it part of our day-to-day lives. And it's not about, I want to be civically involved. It means if you want to be a good, strong professional, you need to be civically involved to ensure that our city's thriving and is on a sustainable path, or you're not going to be able to be successful.
Okay, this is a broad question. Before I start digging down and drilling down into more specific questions, anyone else in the panel want to address what do you think are the three most significant challenges?
Well, I just want to be a little bit optimistic and say for all the years that I've been coming here, with every passing year, this room looks different. And as an industry, if we're really going to represent our city, and this city needs to be built by people that look like this city, and you are the future, the students in this room, and it looks very different than it did 10 years ago. And I would say that makes us better as an industry, and it allows us to serve in ways that are necessary to get anything big and bold done. And even those issues around when you go to community meetings and you represent the industry, it's very helpful when you look like the community you're working in. And so just to stay addicted to hope for a moment, I think that really you are all the future, the young students in this room. And when I became an accidental real estate developer as an urban fellow in the 80s. A real estate developer, I would say a car salesman was more glamorous than a real estate developer. I think the industry has gone through an enormous change where everyone's interested in placemaking and building, and that's really, really good for the industry. So I think that with that, it always comes down to the people. And for that, I feel a sense of great hope.
Billy, and go ahead.
And to continue on MaryAnne's point, which is Scott's third point, I just say I'm humbled to be up here with these three because they are on and off the real estate field tremendous New Yorkers. And I've watched all three of them and try to emulate what they do. I worked through the World Trade Center projects when Scott was our vice chair of the Port Authority, and fought battles on both sides and watched Bill and all the things that he's done for the city of New York and MaryAnne, just amazing. And you really have to give back civically, which is Scott's third point, and it's just part of being a New Yorker. So thank you for that.
I was at a breakfast this morning at Savills, it used to be Savills Studley, and must have been 50 or 60 brokers there. And I was amazed. It's called the Sunrise Series, from it was 8 to 9. And they had the senior brokers, the younger brokers, and exactly what you were talking about, the whole change of who was in that room. A lot of young people, women, minorities. It was really enlightening and positive to see that. And I said, like, you know, and I told my story, my family story, and, you know, but I said, why are you here? Like, why are you at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in this room, you know, listening to me and my spiel? And they got up and they said, because we want to be a part of this industry. We want to be a part of this city. And it was really a positive vibe, seeing them and hearing them talk about what they're, you know, I said, you're in a tough industry, right? There's ups and downs and sideways, but the fact that you're here, you could be on a Zoom call, you know, doing something else. And they all shook their heads. No, we want to be here. We can't do our job on a Zoom call. We can't do it sitting home. And so that really, for me, was very upbeat and encouraging, that there is so, you know, much enthusiasm. But, you know, everybody's correct. Like, get on a community board. Get involved, you know, at a grassroots level, because our voices aren't being heard. I was on a community board, believe it or not, in the 80s, and community board number 5. And it was an eye-opening experience. And, you know, I was a young man, and, you know, my wife sometimes would come to the meetings, and we had a growing family. But, you know, at 6 o'clock on every month on Tuesday at St. Malachy's Church, I was there. And I was able to counteract some of the negative thoughts and development ideas that were being proposed at the time. So
let's drill down. I think one of the biggest questions we all have, you know, we heard this morning about the disaster facing us in the office market. I'm not sure that's necessarily true across the board, and we'll get into that with a number of people on this panel. But there's clearly a current flight to quality, to Class A office. That's what we heard. We heard if you're an owner of Class B and C, you have to head for the hills. So, Bill, we were at our pre-event at the new spectacular Class A office building, the new Deutsche Bank headquarters building, which is the former Time Warner building, which Marty did develop. What do we do with the 100+ million square feet of Class B and C space that is probably not usable today, other than some other alternative, right? Was there 100 million, Bill?
plus or probably more.
100 million, and that's probably bigger than most cities combined, many cities combined in the United States, in terms of square footage of office space. So what's the answer there, Bill? What do we do with that?
Well,
what is that going to take to get developed? And the mayor has something to do with that.
Well, Larry referred to it before. We're actually selling a building to Larry and Marty downtown, 55 Broad Street, to convert to residential. And there's the model. We've done it before. This is not like reinventing the wheel. So back in the mid-90s, where there was a 30% vacancy, it's 100 million feet in Lower Manhattan, there were 30 million feet of vacant space. When I talk about scary times, that was pretty scary. And so we got together, public-private partnership, the city, the Downtown Alliance, the state, and we put forward a plan to allow, and Larry talked about it, Wall Street was predominantly office space back then, convert buildings into residential properties. And you could buy properties back then, Marty, close your ears, for 10 or 15, 20 bucks a foot. And people stepped in. The Alleghanians and others saw this opportunity. The city, changed the zoning laws, had tax incentives, and we went from 10,000 people living in Lower Manhattan, and at 5 o'clock at night, you could, proverbial roll the bowling ball down the street and you wouldn't hit anybody. Today, there are 70,000 people living in Lower Manhattan. 30% of them walk to work. Kids, their schools, their parks, it's a whole changed environment. So we can do that in Midtown. You've got a lot of Class B buildings go up and down 3rd Avenue. I own a few of them. And on 5th Avenue and other parts of the city. And if we put the right pieces together, and I think the mayor was, alluding to the city of yes, so we need to go up to Albany, and I think you'll see, hopefully, early next year, some conversations related to coming up with a plan to allow conversions. Marty, it was announced yesterday, so I'm not saying anything out of school, and Larry are trying to raise over $1 billion for exactly this type of endeavor, and I'm sure people in this room and on this panel and outside this place are all thinking the same thing. There will be capital available if the right public policy is put in place. It takes a lot of work. You've got to, replace 4 bathrooms per floor with 25 or 30 bathrooms and bring the risers up and retrofit and change the buildings. But it's there's limited embedded carbon. You're not tearing down a building. You will upgrade these spaces to be carbon neutral, put the amenities in, and allow people to walk to work. I'll finish here. The 2 buildings that we own right in this neighborhood, one's on 55th Street in Lexington, one's on 36th Street in Park Avenue. They're smaller apartments. When the market tanks, 08, 9/11, whatever, they're the first to go down, and they're the last to go up. This time around, they were the first to go down, but they were the first to go up. Why? Because people wanted to walk to work. And so we know it works. We know people want to be in an urban environment, and we have a unique opportunity to create thousands and thousands of units, some of them affordable, some of them market rate, and we just have to have the political will to do that.
Marty,
If
go ahead.
I might just add to that with the numbers, which is that anything under a 3% vacancy rate in this city is a housing emergency, and we're at just over 2%. There is absolutely no risk that if we do take this very big idea and put it into motion, that we would overbuild on the multifamily front. And so think about the extraordinary opportunity to create more housing for New Yorkers of all income levels. And this is the solution to an aging office stock. But it does not happen without programs, because we know you cannot build multifamily in the city without a tax incentive program. And so again, just to further buttress the statement around what do we do about all these office buildings, is that we need a program that will incent folks like us to convert these buildings, and the numbers simply don't work. It doesn't matter that the average rental rate in New York City is $5,000. We need to inject into the system a program that will allow the development community to convert these buildings.
Marty,
That's the fourth risk is housing. That's the fourth.
Yeah.
There's only 3.
I agree.
Scott,
No, but I'm adding a fourth.
I put that in my first, but I agree with you. Because for housing, there's its own little subset.
Marty, give me your elevator pitch right now for your fun. You're in the elevator with the Qataris or wherever you're pitching this to, and you're pitching this new
let's back up a
converting
second.
Class B into residential. Your elevator pitch, please.
Let's back up a second and start with the fact.
No backing up. I want the elevator
Backing up a second. Let's start with the fact that all B buildings aren't created equal, okay? So pre the pandemic, we made the decision for our B buildings to amenitize them and to upgrade them. And so buildings like 120 Broadway, which are 107 years old, which happen to be a block and a half from 4 World Trade Center, which is 7 years old, so they're 100 years apart. We spent $70 million redoing the building. We redid the facade, redid the lobby. We put a bankers club in there with a cafeteria. We put a roof deck for the tenants to use, solely for the tenants. We upgraded the turnstiles. We put a hotel amenity package in there. And so when the tenants come in, it feels like a brand new building, even though it's 107 years old. And so we feel like for those comparable buildings, we're getting more than our fair share of leasing done for that building. Now, had we not done that, we may be looking at converting that building to residential. So there are ways to take obsolete buildings and make them not obsolete. However,
the elevator pitch.
The elevator
I'm still
pitch
waiting
is
to press the button.
there is at this point in time, a lot of office stock available. As MaryAnne mentioned, there's a very low vacancy rate in New York City, so there's sort of this perfect storm. So we can take office buildings, and from an ESG perspective, we can recreate or repurpose, adaptive reuse an office building without creating new concrete, without creating new curtain wall or steel, and rip out, the chiller systems and the steam systems, and put in an electrical grid that is carbon neutral, and create residential housing that is sorely needed in New York City, and be in at a 20+% discount to building new residential housing, and produce that product today in a faster timeline than if we had to assemble the parcels, get it zoned, build it from ground up, and then lease it up. And that's the elevator.
That's if you can even get vacancy
Correct.
if there are residents in the existing site.
I have a question for you, Estes, but Scott, why don't you
Just
jump into this?
one point I just wanted to say this, because I think you got to also think of this beyond our industry, because I think this is a Kodak moment for our city, right? Which is that we have a stock of product that had historically driven economic viability, sustainability, jobs in our CBDs, that local restaurant, the local store, the service workers. And the Kodak moment is we have to be proactive in recognizing these buildings aren't going to compete. And which are the ones that are film and which are the ones that are digital? And to Marty's point, the ones that are digital, those are the ones you should be investing in, try to keep and upgrading as office buildings that can compete in a post-COVID world with the experience and the amenities that are there. But the ones that are film, we need to get on quickly, because they're no longer an asset to our communities, they're a liability. They're not going to pay real estate taxes. They're not going to be having people live there. They're not going to have energy and activity. They're going to have loiterers around them. They're not going to have people that are going to go into the restaurants. And so if we don't put the policies in place that Bill and MaryAnne were speaking about, this could be a 10, 20, 30-year atrophy of our city, or we could put policies in place to help expedite the private sector to say, okay, I know I can get through this from a regulatory standpoint. I now have the tax incentives to get it done. I can do this to solve our housing problem, and we can make this 10 to 20-year problem a 5 to 10-year solution that provides more housing for our city.
And revenue.
And revenue for our city. And it can't be that we're trying to solve all the solutions. We have a housing crisis, and we have a crisis of older office building stock. So that's the problem. Let's not go to try to solve low-income housing, public housing. Let's not go to try to solve sustainability. All these are important issues, but the reality is let's deal with the issue on hand, because the more you layer on these different requirements, economically it doesn't work anymore. And that's what happens, and you see this in California right now. Every project they do, they're going to try to solve every social problem around that project, and nothing gets built. So we got to deal with this head on and really think of this as this existential crisis, not for the industry, but for the city as a whole.
It's really going to be a public-private partnership. Getting back to the elevator pitch, here's your chance. You want to say one more thing on this, Marty? Go ahead.
So
we're only on the 10th floor.
There's a flip side to this. So it's not so easy.
I'm in, Marty, by the way. I'm invested. Okay.
So it's not so easy to do this. Not any building can just be converted. You have to deal with lots of criteria. You have to worry about your floor plates. You have to worry about your ceiling heights. You have to worry about the tenants that are in the building. There may be holdout tenants that you can't get out. There are 9 or 10 criteria we look at. You have to look at zoning. You can't just put residential in an office building. It depends on the year that it's built, depends on where in the city it was built. So there are lots of criteria, and not just any building can do. So the building we're buying from the Rudin family happens to have a lot of the criteria that allow us to do this. If you take a building that doesn't have all those criteria, we're going to need help from the city, because real estate taxes go up under residential zoning versus office zoning, and it's costlier to do it if you don't have all those attributes that we're talking about. Back to you, Rob.
Perfect. I'll buy into the fun. I love it. Scott, it was an interesting picture of you in Real Deal, the last Real Deal that I saw on my, and I didn't know if it called you a nut or, I forgot what the words, but you were there with Steve Roth, yourself. Who else was on in that picture?
Who was it? I don't know. Was it Marty, you?
No, I don't think it was Marty, but you're one of the few, despite everything you said, you're going to build a 1,400 and how many feet tower?
1,500 feet. 1,500 foot tower.
15, yep, which should be probably as tall as?
The tallest commercial building in New York City.
Right.
In the Western Hemisphere, actually.
Oh, where the Grand Hyatt used to be. Now, it's interesting history. I was involved in the Grand Hyatt when our friend DT owned it, and we took it back
Friend DT.
at Bankers Trust and foreclosed on it, just so everyone understands that.
He doesn't want to even say his name.
But now you're going to build the tallest commercial building in the United States, if not among the world.
Yes.
So again, elevator pitch. Despite everything we said, you're going to go forward with something that's completely contrarian to everything we talked about, except the flight to quality.
Right. And I think
Why?
that's really the factor, right? I mean, the way that people work today is different. And, think about this, and it ties to this last conversation. Think about what happened to malls when e-commerce was invented, right? People used to go to malls to shop, but then e-commerce comes, I'm going to shop online. I'm only going to go to a mall if it's an experience, if it's an outing, if it's engaging, if it's energizing. And the malls that were able to adapt to the new malls that created that experience have done really, really well. The malls that weren't able to are the B's and C's of the office buildings that eventually have died off and are being converted. We're converting one in White Plains right now. It's the same on office buildings. If you can build new to create that experience or transform an existing building to do it, but some areas, some elements you can't transform, right? Some of the ceiling heights, the size of the floor plates, some of the energy efficiencies that Marty was talking about, we're doing too, the first fully electric carbon neutral building. So we may beat you to it, but we'll see how it plays through. And so all those things.
Don't tell Larry.
I know, I didn't. He's not here. I looked to make sure he was gone. But I mean, all those things are really critical. And what's interesting is, there's been the fourth quarter, I'm sure you've heard this all from people today, very slow from a leasing standpoint, right? It really, someone turned off the faucet in September and it's slow. And the only area that's not slow is on tenants that are coming to look, companies that are looking at 175 Park. We have our marketing suite with the TF Cornerstone. We did it in 1 Vanderbilt. So Mark was kind enough to let us put on the 61st floor, looking down at our site. You have the model, you see the Chrysler building, and we've had literally 2 or 3 large companies a week that are coming in that have 2029, 2030, 2031 expirations around the city. They're anywhere from 700,000 feet to 2.5 million feet. And they're going to be here. There's no uncertainty as to where they're going to be. They're going to be in New York. They want to attract the best talent. They want to have the right image. They want to have the right experience, and they're willing to pay for it. And the reality is, that's a 2 times premium to your best Class A space today for the 1 Vanderbilts, or in downtown the same thing on a relative basis. And they're willing to pay for it because it is about creating that experience, and it's something that they want to be identified with, and they know that will make their teams function more effectively, their company more successful by doing that.
Well, clearly the epicenter is always changing of New York City, right? The epicenter was always Park Avenue, that area around Grand Central. It faded, went to the West Side Yards, and now with 1 Vanderbilt and the development of the new JP Morgan headquarters building, I clearly believe the epicenter is coming back.
Well, I mean, and
Grand
again,
Central.
just to this point, because it's important to tie.
And what you're involved in, the whole East-West connection,
Right.
through the Regional Plan Association, clearly.
But I was going to just say, because it ties to the housing conversation, it also shows you when good public policies have been put in place. Right here, you have 2 pieces of public policy that then drove the private sector to make these investments in Park Avenue, Grand Central area. One was the East Side Access, which connects Long Island Railroad into Grand Central, which is opening up not the end of the year, but the beginning of next year now, which is going to have 8 new tracks for 150,000 passengers. And it's basically a whole nother Grand Central below Grand Central. The second was the East Midtown zoning laws that were put in place that basically laid out the roadmap to replace older office buildings that couldn't be competitive with new office buildings, and that gave you the formula of how you can get more density by doing that and invest money into infrastructure. So we're going to put $400 million into Grand Central for transit improvements as part of this, but we get additional FAR, additional square footage. So it shows you, if that wasn't in place, JP Morgan wouldn't happen, 1 Vanderbilt wouldn't happen, TF Cornerstone, us, we wouldn't be doing 175 Park. So that's what we need to be thinking about. Where are the carrots? Where do we put the roadmaps to unleash that private sector innovation?
Might I also just add 2 things? Number 1, Hudson Yards was not successful because it was easy to get to. It's just not true. It's about the flight to quality. And so therefore you build new, and there's inherent demand for that kind of product. And the other thing I just want to say is that ground up developers do not build into a current market, right? What you're doing is building through cycles, not into a single cycle. And that's really important to remember, because you're betting on the future of high quality, high performing 21st century office buildings in the greatest city in the world.
You can give my elevator pitch.
You can correlate from when Midtown East zoning was enacted in 2017.
Which allowed what, Bill? Just explain what that
Well,
was.
it was, Scott said it allowed for more density, higher FAR, transfer of air rights from St. Bart's, from Central Synagogue to St. Patrick's, helped those institutions. People bought those air rights like JP Morgan. And you can, 6 months later or 5 months later, after the Midtown East zoning was passed unanimously in the city council, where it had, right at the end of Bloomberg administration, the clock was ticking, it didn't pass. So it took a few years later to get passed. And then JP Morgan announced 5 months later that they were going to move ahead with their 2.7 million square foot office building. And after that announcement, Morgan Stanley, dozens of other companies re-upped or came to Park Avenue. And you were right, people had moved to the west. But now with their flag flying high saying we're committed to Midtown East, others followed. And that's critical, I think, for the future of our city. We have a site at 415 that was the first office building my father and grandfather and uncle built in 1955, the year I was born. It was a great building, Emery Roth, wedding cake, white brick building. But when the MTA came to us over 20 years ago, that's how long we've been negotiating, to take some of the, condemn some of the space to put the northernmost entrance of the East Side Access. A few years ago, we finally realized we need to take this building down, which we're in the process of doing, and look to the future and design a brand new state-of-the-art boutique office building, not as big as Scott's or JP Morgan's, but it fills a niche for the future. Our floor plates were small, the ceilings were low, it wasn't modern, and we were losing tenants. So we got the memo, and we're looking to the future and looking through these cycles that we're in now, and realizing we build for long term, and this is the future, for my son and daughter and the rest of my family, and it's, I have a picture of my grandson in front of the rendering of the building, because he's the one, and his brothers and cousins will, inherit that property.
To be a Rudin.
Yeah.
But Ron, quick statistic, if you look at Hudson Yards and the World Trade Center, and what was the World Financial Center became Brookfield Place because they cleaned the entire thing out, it was about 20+ million square feet of leasing that was done over a 10-year period. That's more than half the size of Boston.
Right. So, Mary,
But it's small compared to the 450 million square feet of space that are.
But it was done in a very short period of time. All new space.
Marianne, you and I know each other a long time and through a lot of cycles. And I'm going to go back to something you said in 2019.
Oh boy.
Wow.
2019, things were booming, pre-pandemic, right? Things were great. It was cool to live in Brooklyn, right? And you were a big Brooklyn advocate. And she said to me, I said, the movement to suburbs. So we had, Scott was on that panel. And she looked at the audience and she looked at me. She said, the suburbs are over. The suburbs are over. And we wrote that down. I wrote that down. The suburbs are over. I live in White Plains. All my friends, my generation was, you lived in the city a little bit, and then you moved to the suburbs, and you had your kids, and you had your grill, and you sent them to school, right? And you avoided private school. The suburbs are over. It wasn't long. The pandemic hit. So are the suburbs over? Is everyone buying that fancy townhouse in Brooklyn?
Well, the suburbs are over for me because I moved from Edgemont to Brooklyn when I became CEO of our city. So I don't think I was that harsh. I think Scott was with me and he was embracing this outside of the city center strategy for communities outside the city. And I do think for affordable housing, it's an amazing strategy along the train line. So I don't know if that was exactly the notable, but look, my work starts with the love of cities. And New York is my first love. And I believe in cities, and more people are living in cities today than ever in the history of the world. And in 2030, 68% of America will live in cities. That's my business, it's all I know, and that's what I'm betting on.
But it's really interesting, you're beginning to go into far-off lands now. We need a passport. You're actually developing sites in Baltimore and other places.
So Baltimore's a city.
And what's well, do you ever see the Newsweek cover? Where you had Manhattan in great detail, and then you had a sliver of New Jersey, and then you have cacti growing with like starving cows. like the rest of the city, the rest of the countries that were reviewed outside of New York City. Why these other cities? What do you see in expanding outside the 5 boroughs? Because you've been a leader in developing in the boroughs, especially for residential.
Yeah, and the boroughs are interesting because it's not all about Manhattan, but I'd say Baltimore is really interesting to us. And again, my fellows on the panel, we've all kind of stepped outside New York, and it's really quite interesting in so many ways. It's really a panel worth itself in terms of what it's like to do what we do in New York and then step outside the city. So I think for me, it begins with the love of city, the idea that we can make an impact, and 14 million square feet in Baltimore of a market that on a good day is about 30 million total. This is a 14 million square foot entitlement with unbelievable sponsorship with Goldman Sachs and Kevin Plank, the founder of Under Armour. And we were invited in, and it's completely entitled. You build what you're able to build when you're able to build it effectively.
Wow.
And that kind of flexibility doesn't come along very
It's almost
easily.
like your master development opportunity in New Rochelle. Not as big.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, just as Mary was talking, 2 points that then one, the mayor said it, right? Like, he said, oil is to Texas, real estate is to New York. When you leave New York, it's like you realize that if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And so if you're being educated in real estate in New York and you're practicing real estate in New York, you will do extraordinarily well anywhere else in the United States because the level of sophistication, insights, get it done mentality is very different here than in those other markets. And the only other point I'll just add to this, which I think is interesting, as I think about cities, which I love cities too, I think the future of these superstar cities, where places like New York, where there's this, the description I described before about everyone coming in and the talent being here, eventually it gets to a point where the affordability issue, the capacity issue overwhelms it. And it could become something that, becomes self-fulfilling the other way. And so one way to get around that is to have a regional lens. And so we're sort of the thesis that for a superstar city to be sustainable, you need to be part of an integrated superstar region, which New York is, both whether it's the boroughs or the suburbs, and with our transit systems and infrastructure we have, position as well. But to think about if you can now have a workforce that lives at a place that they can be more affordable, still the same quality of life, but then connect back into this cultural and knowledge worker hub of Manhattan, that's the big advantage that we have.
Well, that's my elevator pitch, because if you think
So
about
we
the
can switch
Acela
elevator
corridor,
pitch.
DC and New York, how expensive it is to live there, how expensive the real estate is to rent space there, and you think about the way in which we're going to work in the future and the flexibility. Baltimore has an incredible workforce. It's unbelievably educated and diverse, and now people can work really from Baltimore, and they can go to DC a few days a week, have an unbelievable quality of life. So Baltimore has a kind of grit that Brooklyn has, and my team and I fell in love with it, and we're excited for the 14 million square feet. There's 1 million square feet that are coming online right now, and we're actually leasing space. We have 2 100,000 square foot tenants, which is kind of remarkable, again, in a very different market that's quite shallow. And it's all about a flight to quality and the fact that it's so accessible off of 95. Really excited about it. It's not an abandonment in any way of our love of New York. It's just an expansion of this belief in cities.
We may have to have a Baltimore contingent here next year.
Yeah.
I'm going to change the topic a little bit, and this is from some of the analysts and associates in my group. I asked them to actually write a bunch of questions for me, which is great. Caesars just put up a billboard, I think on 42nd Street, maybe, or one of the Midtown streets. Caesar's Palace, really promoting the idea of a new casino in Midtown. New York City is putting out casino applications for Midtown. The largest players, SL Green, related companies, Tor Equities, I know some others, Veneto, they're all chomping at the bit. So what is your view of bringing the devil to Midtown? Does anybody have a view on this panel, or any of you
Well,
going
I'll
to
start by
participate in
saying
this?
I don't think it's going to be the devil if it's handled properly, and I'm going to give a shout out. Kevin Long is here, the chair of ESD, very much in the province of government to make sure that we don't become Las Vegas and that we do it New York style. And I think the jobs are amazing, and it's an extraordinary opportunity.
I second that.
Are any else you involved in this or thinking about getting involved?
It's going to be an incredible revenue maker for New York State and New York City, and I think it should be in New York City.
Okay. There are a lot of opportunities for development in this city. We talked about the conversion of B and C office. We talked about casinos. everyone's on board. I guess you're all hanging out in the background waiting for the money train to you to join the money train. I'm sure they all have their own little things going on with all the people I mentioned. What are areas of the city? What are the other areas of the city that you see for development? You look along the Bronx shoreline. It's amazing. I grew up in the Bronx and never would have envisioned those areas ever being developed. What else is out there that you see as the next go-to development opportunity? I know we talked about the one area that I got out of this morning, or one of the few areas, was studio financing. I mean, you can't finance much, but you can finance studios. And they said studios in New York City were the place to be for finance. So what other property types or areas of the city that you see as opportunistic for development?
I think one of the great things about our city, and sometimes it takes a little longer, is the way we, and I think Scott talked about before, we reinvent ourselves, right? So, back in the 90s, Lower Manhattan was 70% financial service and 30% other. Today, it's totally opposite. We made a conscious effort to diversify the employment base down there, and then you're seeing that all over the city. If I sat here 6 months ago and said Memorial Sloan Kettering is going to buy 400,000 feet in the Lipstick Building, you'd think I was crazy. But they took an opportunistic approach. They were able to buy it at a good price, and move. Will be next year or whenever move their people into there and expand their campus. So you're seeing life science, you're seeing medical, you're seeing film, TV production. You can't walk on the streets of New York City without seeing a Blue Bloods or FBI or whatever show or movie being filmed in this city. So it's that kind of reinvention that I think is going to drive the future of our city and the creativity. And going back again into the day, my father and Larry, when they were trying to make sure that the CEO didn't move out of the city and move up into Westchester or Connecticut, because then the company would soon follow suit. Well, it really doesn't matter where the CEO lives anymore, because the CEO realizes he or she needs to be where the talent is, and the talent is here. And the suburbs are not Westchester or Connecticut. They're Brooklyn, they're Queens, they're the Bronx. That's where the people are going to move to and live and have easy access into our city. So I think I don't think there's an answer to your question. It's every part of the city has development opportunities. And if the city changes the zoning for housing, for conversions, or increases, comes up with a new 421A plan, these are all really important public policy decisions that will drive the future of our city.
I mean, Marty, could the World Cup hopefully coming here? I know the mayor was there scouting it out, right? Could that be the impetus, almost like the Olympics?
Well, the World Cup's going to be all over the United States.
To implement some of the mass transit initiatives.
Yeah.
Scott has pushed with the RPA and others. Could this be like the reason for the politicians to sort of make a decision?
No, I don't think that's going to push it. The reason things happen is because you have someone who owns a piece of land and they finally decide they're going to develop on it. Or they have a piece of land, they're finally going to sell it for a price that makes sense for someone else to develop on it. So you have Solo sitting on all this land that he bought from Con Ed. Now his son's sitting with it. So he throws it into the ring to see if it makes sense for gaming. If it doesn't make sense for gaming, hopefully he gets to develop it one day, because it's a great piece of land sitting in Manhattan. You mentioned the Bronx waterfront. Jersey City continues to get built out. We're doing a large project in Journal Square, in Queens, in Brooklyn, the waterfronts, and then further inward. They're all great. There's sites everywhere. It's just a matter of getting the land for the right price so that you can afford to build it. And as we know, we all need housing. So if there are housing programs that the state and the city can help us with, we'll develop those sites and make sense out of it.
Marty, if I might, just because I'm a Queens girl, so I'll say it, like you've been doing stuff in Queens, but the Queens waterfront, where Amazon was kind of driven out, that whole swath there. What it needs is it needs to be bonused up for density to allow for the resiliency and the construction costs to be managed in a way where you can build the right stuff. And so that's this public-private partnership, because you can have a great piece of dirt, but it doesn't have the kind of entitlement or the use provisions that respond to the market. So this goes back to anything of scale requires some form of partnership with government. And I think the lack of a functioning administration, I went in after the Amazon debacle, and we had three developers, all three developers wanted to build something extraordinary on the Queens waterfront in a way that was much more inclusive than what some claim was the downfall of Amazon. And notwithstanding all of that zest, all of that enthusiasm, all of that good real estate, there was not the will of the government to do what was necessary to stand up and make happen what's critical to build anything of scale.
Scott, you've been a leader. I love a lot of your emails, and you've been a driver and a leadership. You know, what are you doing in partnership with your buildings and ownership to bring the office worker back to his desk? Other than Wall Street just announcing that bonuses are going to be very challenging and your job may be challenging. Maybe that will do it without you promoting that anymore. But what have you done? You've done some really creative.
I think,
how do you bring that person back to the office?
Yeah, again, a couple things. I think first, I think most of us are all doing something like this, and I think, but it's also not something that's new. What's interesting is the world was already shifting pre-COVID, right? It used to be that real estate in Larry's first building, right? Build 4 walls, clean the floor, clean the windows, and sign rent, and you got checks. Over the last 5 or 6 years, maybe a decade, it's been much more about activating what happens within those 4 walls. It's that we're a service provider. We're not just a builder of space, and it's about providing a level of hospitality, a level of a sense of being part of a community, a sense of belonging, which means you need different amenities, you need programming. We have concierges in all our buildings. We call RXOs, experience officers, that engage with the people when they come into the building. And so it really needs to be something that is magnetic and as people feel like they're part of something bigger, right? And that's why they want to leave home, because they want to be part of something bigger, particularly the younger people, right? Where are they going to meet people? Where are they going to get the apprenticeship that they would need to get? And so creating that bond of a sense of community. There's a stat in the multifamily space that if someone lives in an apartment building, if they have a personal relationship with someone else in that apartment, a friendship with someone else in that complex, they're 80% more likely to renew their lease. And I think that's also true in the commercial space, right? Which is the more you can engage people as being part of that community itself, inside the building and around the building, the more likely they're going to want to stay there, they're going to be satisfied and be committed to making a better community. So that's, I think, a key thing. And then, I just wanted to go back on your other comment real quick. The other thing I think that's important in terms of where to invest is on the public-private partnership side, is where infrastructure is being invested, right? You can always see is that where there's infrastructure invested, it attracts private sector. So if it was on the west side and you saw the whole Hudson River Park and what it did to open up the entire west side, the buildings over there that were, marginal in the past, they became prime locations because now the waterfront was alive with people and activities in that mix. Even, in Willard's Point now, the mayor mentioned that they're building the soccer stadium there, right? And that's gonna then finally, after probably 4 decades, spark development in Willard's Point with housing, entertainment, et cetera, in that mix. And then that's one of the big positives when I think you think about New York, the amount of infrastructure that's been invested at our airports, being invested at our airports. We just started a project at JFK, Terminal 6. You can look at what happened in Moynihan Station. We talked about Grand Central. There's just so much being invested in infrastructure that will be, foundational to that next level of growth. And areas like Queens and the waterfront is another spot. You mentioned Amazon. That's the example when I say bad government, right? I mean that there's ideological policies versus political policies. I mean, ideological politics versus practical policies that drove that. And if you look at what they're doing in Virginia, I mean, it makes me sick whenever I open up the paper and everything they're building there, nothing that they were required to do, but of course they're doing it because this is their home. And so, we can't have those forced errors as a city, because right now, when the market is where it is, we could have really used that shot in the arm of that type of development.
If you would go to the administration and pick the top 3, this is putting your Regional Plan Association former chairman hat on, okay? The top 3 regional plan infrastructure priorities for this region that are critical to ensure the long-term growth of our region. What would they be, the top 3 that right now we don't have in place or funded? What would be those top 3 that are super critical for the survival of our...
Obviously the whole Gateway tunnel situation is critical because, and to speak into MaryAnne's point, that Northeast corridor to bring people to New York and back it's not only a lifeline for the city, it's a lifeline for the country, right?
That's
And
the
so
tunnel between,
that's a tunnel between New Jersey, the Hudson, under the Hudson River that's been 100 years old and had issues. And now it looks like that's moving forward, but that's critical to move forward. And then I think, again, housing policies, right? I mean, I would say more broadly, we need all these things we've talked about. If we don't come up with a, plan to deal with this housing crisis, we're gonna have extraordinary problems on our hands. And then the third one, again, you're not gonna like the answer because it's not what you're asking for, but it's making government work, right? This is the problem. You can't ask people to invest money in Second Avenue subway expansions or congestion pricing and all these things that we're asking for if it feels like it goes into a black hole and no one sees the results. And so, you have to invest in infrastructure, but we have to reinvent how we invest in infrastructure.
The Second Avenue subway is a really good example. I think, that's been the plannings for 50, 60 years. My grandfather was at the first groundbreaking. But if you go on the Upper East Side now, Madison Avenue, 3rd Avenue, 2nd Avenue, 1st Avenue, literally every other block, there is a residential building being developed or completed or being torn down. Why? Because of the 2nd Avenue subway. I mean, there's, again, a direct correlation to that infrastructure investment and the creation of those apartment buildings. So we've got to have those infrastructure investments, and we've proven again and again and again that the private sector will follow suit pretty quickly thereafter to do their thing.
you want to take a shot at that? Last question. I've always done this, and everyone always does this, but I think they copied me, but it's okay. Larry Silverstein always had the best response to this, which I can't repeat, but he could do it at his age. Probably I couldn't say it. But quickly, what keeps you up at night, Marty? What would be the two things that keep you up at night concerning our future in the city and your future as a big real estate macha in the city? That's macha.
Real estate term. 421A getting redone and our bail laws.
421A coming back, and the second one?
Bail reform.
Bail reform. Interesting, bail reform. I like that. Scott?
I'm a little more theoretical. I'm more about being complacent. I think standing still is moving backwards, and the world's moving too fast. And so I'm always worried about not thinking about where the world's going versus where we are.
I think what Scott talked about is government and government doing the right thing and looking at a broader picture and not being focused on political expediency and dealing with the issues, whether it's bail reform, crime, infrastructure. Those are the things that keep me up.
MaryAnne?
Literally, the 5 years of infrastructure in my neighborhood in Park Slope, where they've ripped up every street and it's taken half a decade, it's not finished yet, and it gets to this idea of how taxing it can be to live in this city, and the quality of life issues, they loom large, and it has to be a place people want to live. And I think we ride on our own coattails, but at some point it's gotta come to roost. So I think it's really important to create and continue to look to create a livable city.
Well, I'm, for one, always feel privileged to have the opportunity to be the moderator for these folks. And it is like they were just invited, again, a decade and 25 years of doing this. So let's all give a hand